Hi, this is Grandin Gill, and this is the first in a series of mini lectures I'm creating around the chapters of my book, Informing Business, Research and Education on a Rugged Landscape. And the purpose of the first chapter of this book is to motivate my interest in informing science, and in particular to deal with what I refer to as the crisis in informing that is increasingly typifying research into U.S. businesses. So let's start with an overview of what I'm going to be covering. The first question I'm going to look at is why we care about this. Whenever you're doing research, one of the first things that you want to deal with is the question of why the research is important. The next topic that we'll talk about is what I call the trust catastrophe. What we've seen over time is that trust in U.S. business has been declining, and our students seem to be becoming less trustworthy as well. The next topic we'll talk about is some of the complaints waged about business education, both in terms of educating our students and educating managers. Then we'll talk about the implications of research for practice. Are they having any impact, and is that impact positive? And then finally, we'll look at some of the questions that I'm going to be trying to address in the remaining chapters of the book. So why do we care so much about business research and education? Well, there are a number of reasons that a manager should care. The first, of course, is the cost. Business education is very expensive. If you look at business faculty and researchers, they're among the most expensive faculty you have in a university. And all of these costs end up being borne either by the students who are in debt, or by the state, which subsidizes education, or by the private sector. Another reason that we may be concerned about business education is mistakes. If you take a look at some of the things that we teach, in many cases, they may not even be that accurate. Another area that we'd be concerned about is the notion of justice. One of the things that we have seen over the past 20 years or so is a real stratification of society, with top executives earning much, much more, and the lower middle class is rapidly losing ground. Obviously, business factors into this, and the question is, how do we incorporate this into our education? Finally, there is the question about the future. If we do not successfully educate our students, where is the resources going to come in future years to support the lifestyles of those of us who have to retire? So all of these are reasons why business research and education should be of interest to us. So one of the reasons that we should care about business research is what I refer to as the trust catastrophe. And there is ample evidence that trust in business has been falling. For example, if we take a look at surveys done in the U.S. and abroad, we have seen a huge drop in trust in just the past 5 years or so. And if you look at other countries like Brazil and China, their trust in business is substantially higher than what we see in the U.S. Only Europe shows slightly lower trust in business. Another important aspect of this is the growing level of agreement that more regulation is needed for business. In France, it's up to 84%, and in the U.S., it's climbed to 61%. That does not augur well for free enterprise capitalism. Another shocking statistic is the percentage of graduate students in business who report cheating over the course of their education. And if you look at business students, the number is 56%, as composed to 47% for other students. And interestingly, if you look at the course of their education, the best we can say is that they don't get much worse while they are doing their business graduate education. The MBA degree has always been the gold standard of business education, But over the past 5 or 6 years, faith in that degree has been declining. If you look at the HBS Global Summit in 2008, here are some of the quotes that we've seen. In the financial sector, having an MBA does not increase the odds of promotion. At McKinsey, the famous consulting firm, non-MBA employees go through a 6-week training period and then proceed to do the same job as their MBAs, and they haven't really noticed a difference between them. If you listen to a top recruiter at HBS, his comment was that given a choice, he'd rather have the list of students admitted than the list of students graduating. All of these things call into question whether the MBA degree is really offering the type of value that we have long expected it to offer. Taking a step beyond the question of whether the MBA is useful, there is a further question of whether an MBA and business education may actually be harmful. This has been a question for a long time. When I was doing my MBA, which I completed in 1982, we were all required to read a famous article that had just come out by Hayes and Abernathy called Managing Our Way to Economic Decline. To read the most widely known paragraph from this article, during the past 2 decades, American managers have increasingly relied on principles that prize analytical detachment and methodological elegance over insight, based on experience, into the subtleties and complexities of strategic decisions. As a result, maximum short-term financial returns have become the overriding criteria for many companies. Now, what's interesting about that article, and this resonates with many people today, is that everything that they predicted in that article turns out to be almost certainly incorrect. They, for example, argued that U.S. productivity was declining and was going to continue to decline. Well, in fact, just around that time, as a result of the information age, U.S. productivity started increasing. They complained about the fact that the U.S. has lost the capacity to innovate. Ironically, this is just before the computer revolution, followed by the internet revolution, both of which the U.S. took the lead in. And another rather interesting thing is that U.S. was supposedly placing less value on R&D than other nations. Yet we have caught up and in many respects surpassed them at this point. Finally, which I think is most interesting, is that the authors really strongly recommended we be more like the Europeans and the Japanese. So, while the comments they made resonated, one might also argue this is a demonstration of just how little researchers are able to predict the future. And what about our academic research? A great deal of money has been invested into business academic research. As I may have mentioned, business faculty members are among the most expensive faculty members at a university. So what have been the concrete results? Well, there have been a lot of commentary suggesting that these results are not necessarily so positive. For example, in a book listing the 50 top management innovations over the past 100 years, not one of them originated in academia. They did a study looking at the correlation between how much articles were cited and how important managers thought the topic of the article was. Interestingly, there was almost no correlation between those two, which is to say what academics regard as important is not the same as what managers necessarily regard as important. There was a study looking at the flow of knowledge between academia and practice, and to the extent that any flow was noticed, the practitioners were teaching the academics rather than the other way around. All of these suggest that our research is not having the type of impact that we would like to see. There have also been some serious concerns regarding the actual content of what we are teaching. Does it actually hurt the way managers think? And some of the most famous theories in management and finance appear to be contributing to this. For example, if you take a look at agency theory, what it essentially says is that individuals should be assumed to act in a manner that is entirely self-interested and modeled entirely in terms of their individual gain. Well, this is not really good news if we are imagining managers as contributing to the overall welfare of society. And in fact, if you look at CEO pay at top organizations, this model seems to be a reasonably good reflection. Another is transaction cost economics. A Nobel Prize was recently awarded in this area. And transaction cost economics basically assumes that we need organizations to deal with the opportunism that would otherwise occur in markets, which is another way of saying that people cannot be trusted to behave properly on their own. There are also theories that have caused us to take on huge risks that we didn't fully understand. Portfolio theory is an example of this. And the core of portfolio theory is the notion that if you diversify a portfolio, you eliminate a lot of the risk. But what we've seen in many of the past financial crises is this turns out to be a very poor assumption. And as a result, people have imagined themselves to be far safer than they actually were in terms of their financial position. One of the big concerns that's been raised about our research is the failure to see what are known as black swans. And a black swan is simply an event that cannot be predicted. And researchers such as Nassim Taleb had made the argument that black swan events play a disproportionate role in terms of what produces success or the lack thereof. Yet conventional theories are completely incapable of accommodating black swans precisely because theories are intended to predict based on what we know, and black swans nearly always occur based on what we do not know or what we could not anticipate. Let me complete this session with what I would call 7 questions that are worth asking. These are the questions that I'll be focusing on in the subsequent chapters of Informing Business. The first of these questions is, can we continue research and education as usual? My answer to that is it would be very risky for us to do so. The next question I would ask is, why does some research have impact whereas others does not? And I think this is a very important question because degrees such as the executive DBA are specifically focused on research with impact. And the question is, how do we direct research so that it has an effect? Another significant question is, how do we match our research to the domain we're studying? Because different types of research may well require different approaches and may be suited to different types of research problems. Another question to ask is, what makes research rigorous? You hear the term rigorous with academics all the time, and my usual reaction when I hear that is to hold on to my wallet because they're going to be asking for money. But what actually does rigor mean, and are we achieving that in the current ways that we do research? Another question is, can research and informing be separated? Researchers in academia typically worry about getting a paper published, but they don't really worry that much about who learns from that paper subsequently. And the argument we will make in this book is that when you separate informing from the research process, instead of thinking of them as an integrated process, you lose a great deal. Another question is, are we being effective in our forming, and what can we do to be more effective? Here, once again, this will be a major topic of this book as we look at the processes involved in informing as they move from very, very low-level informing, as you might have in a computer system, all the way to interpersonal communication of complex ideas. Finally, what do students need to learn? Given that we've raised questions about what we're currently teaching students, it's important for us to look at the types of things that we should be teaching in business education, because many people in programs such as executive DBA programs are actually going to be teaching students, and we want that teaching to have value.